Hello, everybody. We are on live right now. Okay, let's continue read our new. Oh, oh. Okay. Continue read the second bank of the United States. Okay. Another important continuity between the old and new bank was the concentration of foreign investments. Oh, concentration in fact, the largest single block of stock in the new bank, about one-third in all, was held by this group.哦，这是出现了卖美贼呀、美国的资产直接给到了外国人的手里。It is no exaggeration to say that the second Bank of the United States was rooted as deeply in British in, in, in Britain as it was. Okay. The nation's third central bank ran into deep trouble from the start. It had promised to continue the tradition of moderating the other banks by refusing to accept any of their notes unless they were redeemable in specie on demand. But when the other banks returned the gesture and required that the new bank also pay out specie on their demand, it frequently lost its resolve. There was also the tiny matter of corruption. As the bank's major historian wrote, so many influential people were interested in the state banks as stockholders that it was not advisable to give offense a demand of payment in specie, and borrowers were anxious to keep the banks in humor to lend. Another important continuity between the old and new bank was concentration. Concentral, concentration, concentration. In fact, the largest single block of stock in the new bank, or one-third of what was held by this group. It is certain to exaggeration to say Second Bank of the United States was rooted as deeply in Britain and it was in America. OK，这就是卖美贼嘛。卖美贼哦。国家的第三家中央银行从一开始遇到严重的，它曾通过拒绝接受任何不能按需跟随硬币的其他银行来制约这些，但是当其他银行采用的要求新银行也按照新银行经常动摇其决心。还有一个微不足道的腐败问题，正如该银行拥有影响力的人以股东的身份对银行感兴趣，以至于要求用硬币支付是不明智的，而借款人则急于让银行保持愿意放贷的心情。And then the third central bank was deep in trouble from the start. It had promised to continue the tradition of moderation moderate，中等的、温和的、一般的、有节制的，moderate。Moderate on the other hand, by refusing to accept any their notes unless they were redeemable in space on demand. But when the other banks returned this the gesture, the gesture, and required that the new bank also pay all fees on their demand if frequently lost its resolve. Lost its result. 执行力不足 resolve. There was also the tiny matter of corruption, as the bank's major historian wrote, so many different people were interested in the state banks as stockholders that it was not advisable to give offense by demanding payment fees, and borrowers were anxious to keep the bank in order to lend. It's not advisable to give offense, to give offense by demanding payment in fees. 啊 anxious to keep the banks in the humor to lend， 对其感兴趣，因此不易通过要求支付硬币而得罪他们，而借款人则急于让人的兴趣。全是裙带关系，说白了全是裙带关系。In economics, every policy carries a consequence, and the consequence of the loose monetary policy of the second bank of the United States was that America was introduced to her first experience with what now is called the boom bust circle. Gambling tells us in 1816, the post-war boom was fallen. There was especially active speculation in Western lands. The new bank joyously participated. 这文字指出，货币政策首次经历繁荣萧条周期，这也说明新成立要积极参与到战后的繁荣战役和投机活动。每一项政策的伴随后，而今天刚货币宽松的后果是某国首次体现了繁荣相近的账本告诉我们，1810年开始繁荣，尤其是西部地区存在非常活跃的投机者，新银行仍然欣然参与其中。In economics, every policy carries a consequence, and the consequence of the losing monetary policy of the second bank of the United States was that America was introduced to her first experience with what now is called the boom-bust circle. Gabriel tells in 1816, the post-war boom was full on. There was especially active speculation 投机 in Western land. The new bank joyously participated. 繁荣萧条周期1816年就开始。 The bank had the advantage over its competitors of a federal charter, plus the government's agreement to accept its notes in payment of taxes. But the state banks were by no means left out of the game. It was still within their power to create money through fractional reserve banking and thus to further inflate the amount of the nation's circulating currency. Anxious to get in on this action, Pennsylvania chartered 37 new banks in 1817. The same year, Kentucky followed suit with 40 new charters. The total number of banks grew by, oh my god, 46% in just the first 2 years after the central bank was created. Another spot along the road that had a church, a tavern, or blacksmith shop was deemed a suit place for setting up a bank. In that time frame, in that same time frame, the money supply was expanded by additional 27.4 million, another taxpayer inflation over 40%. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. 这就叫做货币大放水。头2年，银行值就增长了6%，沿途任何拥有教堂、酒馆和体尿铺的地方都被认为是设立银行的合适地点。在同一时期，货币供应量又增加了2000万、3000万，这对那超过40%的又一次剥削。Any sport along the road that had a church, a tavern, or blacksmith shop was deemed a suitable place for setting up a bank. Any spot along the road that had a church, a tavern, right? A tavern, yeah, tavern. A blacksmith shop was deemed a suitable place for setting up a bank. In that same frame, 同一时期, the money supply was spent by another taxpayer facing over 40%. 16年到18年的扩张。The first boom-bust circle. Okay, in the past, the effect of this inflationary process always had been a gradual evaporation of purchasing power and the continuous transfer of property from those who produced it to those who controlled the governments and ran the banks. This time, however, the process took on a new twist. Gradualism, 渐进派, was replaced by catastrophism. Catastrophism 是叫什么垄断是叫垄断者是吧 The monetary science, with their hands firmly on the controls of the money machine, now began to throw the levers first one way and then the other. The expansion and the expansion and the deliberate contraction of the money supply literally threw the nation into economic convulsion, conver, conversion, con, conversion. Why wait for the apples to fall when the harvest can be hastened simply by shaking the tree? 为什么呢？天呐，就繁荣2年，1819年就开始恐慌了啊！缓慢侵蚀购买力被突如其来的灾难性变化之际，持续操纵货币供应，导致国家经济这个通货膨胀过程一直是购买力逐渐蒸发，以及财产从生产者持续转移到那些控制政府和经营者。然而这一次，这个过程呈现出新的变化，渐进主义者被灾难性的突变所取代。那些牢牢掌控货币机器的货币科学家们现在开始发不动杠杆，先朝一个方向，然后朝另一个方向。货币供应的扩张，然后是故意的收缩，简直将国家抛入经济震荡之中。既然遥控数目就能加速收获，何必等待苹果自然落地呢？有道理呀。In the past, effect of this inflationary process was always have been the gradual evaporation, gradual evaporation 蒸发消失 evaporation of power of purchasing power and the continuous transfer of property from those who produce it to those who control the government and run the bank. This time, however, the process took on a new twist. Gradualism was replaced by catastrophism. The theory that change in the earth's crust 戏剧化术语，恐慌前的巨变。The monetary scientists, with their hands firmly on the controls of the money machine, now began to throw the levers, first one way and then the other. The expansion and then the elaborate contraction of the money supply literally threw the nation into economic conversion, 故意的 deliberate. Deliberate. Why wait for the apples to fall when the harvest can be hastened simply by shaking the tree? Hasten. Hasten. 匆忙的加速。Hastened. In 1818, worsened by government interference, the bank suddenly began to tighten its requirements for new loans and to call in as many of the old loans as possible. Tighten its requirements for new loans and call and to call in as many of the old loans as possible. This contraction of the money supply was justified to the public then exactly as it is justified today. And it was necessary, they said, to put the brakes on inflation. The fact that this was the same inflation the bank had helped to create in the first place seemed to have gone unnoticed. 这是货币紧缩政策了吗？这种会当时对公众的理由和今天的理由如出一辙，未了未知。然而，作者讽刺指出，公众没有注意到，正是这样主张通膨上。他说这是为了给通货膨胀产生，然而这家银行当初曾帮助者的，这是被忽略的。But suddenly began to tighten its requirements for new loans and to call in as many of the old loans as possible. The contraction of contraction of the money supply contraction contract 压缩 contraction of money supply justified the public exactly supply was justified the public then exactly as it is justified today. It was necessary, they said, to put the brakes on inflation. Brakes. Put the brakes on. The fact that this was the same inflation the bank had helped to create in the first place seems to have gone unnoticed. There's no doubt that many bankers and politicals act in good faith in the attempt to bring under control the inflation they themselves had caused. Not everyone who benefits from the central bank mechanism fully understands it. Like Frankenstein, they create a monster without realizing they can't control it. Their crime is one of stupidity, stupidity, not malice, not malice. Huh? But stupidity is not a characteristic of the average banker, especially a central banker, and we must conclude that many of the monetary scientists are well aware of the monster's power for this destruction. At best, they just don't care as long as they are safe, and at worst, they perceive that they are in the apple harvesting business. They deliberately tease and prod the monster in anticipation of his rampage through the village or chance. In the final analysis, of course, it is of the little importance whether the shaking of the trees is out of innocence or malice. End result is the same. How the apples do fall. The country's first experience with the laboratory created monetary contraction began in 1818 when the bank became concerned about its own ability to survive. Professor Rosbar says, starting in July 1818, the government and the BUS, Bank of the United States, began to see what dire straits they were in. The enormous inflation of money and credit, aggravated by the massive fraud, had put the Bank of the United States in danger of going under and illegally failing to maintain its payment. Over the next year, the BUS began a series of enormous contractions, forced curtailments of loans, contractions of credit in the South and West. The contraction of money and credit swiftly brought to the United States its first widespread economic and financial deception. The first nationwide bombast circle had arrived in the United States. The result of this contraction was a rash of defaults, bankrupt, bankruptcies of business and manufacturers, and a liquidity of unsound investments during the boom. The circle is worsened by government interference. Okay, I think that's all for today. 352、345。345. Okay, I think that's all for today. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Bye bye.